"I forgot I had a wife," the Duke of Harrowgate said, his gloved hand still resting on the nursery door. Cecilia Tremaine stood beside the empty cradle, her fingers pressed to the carved rail she had polished until the mahogany shone. She had not known a sentence could make a woman disappear while she was still breathing. Edward Aldridge laughed first. Desmond Redmond gave a low chuckle behind his glass. Morning light fell through the high windows of the east wing, showing the lace canopy, the folded linen, and the small ivory rattle tied with a faded blue ribbon. It touched her husband's face as well. Ignatius Vale, Duke of Harrowgate, did not laugh after he had spoken. That almost made it worse. His mouth remained a hard line, as if the cruelty had escaped before he could lock it away. His friends stood behind him in black coats and cream waistcoats, comfortable in a house that had never made room for her. Cecilia kept her hand on the cradle rail. If she let go, they might see how badly the words had struck. She wore a simple sprigged muslin morning gown. A damp cloth lay folded on the small table beside her. The water in the basin was gray from old dust. She had done only what the housekeeper told her a Duchess of Harrowgate was expected to do, prepared the nursery before summer. Now her husband had found her there and made her a jest before two gentlemen who should have bowed. Edward leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "Your Grace, one cannot blame you. The East Wing has swallowed half the family history. A wife is a smaller matter." Ignatius turned his head slightly. "Enough." It was not an apology. It was only a command to end the sound. Cecilia looked from one man to the next. She could have curtsied. She could have murmured that she had misunderstood. She could have made herself small enough to spare them the discomfort of what they had done. Instead, she lifted the rattle from the cradle and laid it gently in the center of the small mattress. "Does your Grace wish the room locked again?" she asked. Her voice was quiet. It carried. Edward's smile thinned. Desmond's gaze dropped to the floorboards. Ignatius looked at the cradle, then at her. For one bare instant his face changed. Not anger, not disdain. Something far more naked. A flash of pain so sharp it seemed to empty the room of air. Then the Duke returned. "I wish the room left exactly as you found it, madam," he said. "Gentlemen, we are done here." He turned and walked away. His friends followed, boots loud in the corridor. The door remained open. Cecilia stood alone in the nursery, with the cradle between her and the life she had been told to prepare for. She did not cry. She pressed her thumb once against the carved rail where the wood was warm from her own hand. The empty cradle had made her ridiculous in his eyes. One day, she thought the same cradle would force him to look at what he had thrown away. She did not yet know how cruel that punishment would be. She only knew she would not beg him to remember her. The marriage was 6 months old, though it had the chill of something buried much longer. Cecilia had not been the bride chosen for Harrowgate. Her elder cousin, Camilla Prescott, had been selected first. Camilla had beauty fortune enough to be useful, and the sort of bright laugh men mistook for warmth. 3 weeks before the wedding, after hearing that the Duke kept his first wife's rooms sealed, Camilla fled to Bath with a cavalry officer. The Tremaine family turned to Cecilia before the scandal sheets had finished enjoying the story. She was the quieter cousin, the obedient one, the one who could be told that duty was a form of honor. Her father's debts had already brought creditors to the door. Harrowgate patronage meant safety for everyone she loved. So Cecilia stood in the little stone chapel at Tremaine Court and married a man who looked at her as if she were an entry in a ledger. Before the vows, Ignatius took her aside. "You will have my name," he said, "my protection, your own apartments. You will not lack for comfort." He did not touch her hand. Cecilia remembered answering with perfect calm. "Then I shall do my best not to trouble, Your Grace." At Harrowgate, she learned to fold her wishes as flat as her gloves and put them away before anyone could see them. The house itself seemed built for restraint. Everything functioned. Nothing welcomed. Cecilia learned her marriage by the spaces he left empty. Ignatius dined at the far end of the table and spoke to the steward about drainage ditches. He rode out before dawn. If Cecilia entered the library, he rose within 10 minutes and claimed business elsewhere. Yet he was never openly unkind to the household. That almost confused her more. When a young footman, flustered by her quiet manner, called her Miss Tremaine in the entrance hall, Ignatius stopped mid-step. "Her Grace," he said. The correction was low. It silenced every servant within hearing. The footman went white. Cecilia felt a strange ache in her chest. Her husband would guard the title. He simply would not look at the woman inside it. After that day, every servant curtsied more deeply. The name was obeyed everywhere, except in the marriage that had made it hers. She tried at first to make the place less cold. She opened the west sitting room. She sent broth to old Mrs. Kettle, whose cottage roof let rain fall beside the hearth. She placed narcissus bulbs along the gallery, not because anyone noticed, but because something living ought to be permitted to grow in Harrowgate Hall. Then Mrs. Hughes, the housekeeper, mentioned the East Nursery. "Only custom, Your Grace," the woman had said, twisting her keys. "Every duchess before summer has seen it aired. Her late Grace had it made ready, and then—" She stopped. Cecilia had not pressed. The servants often stopped when speaking of Helena, the first duchess. Her name lay over the house like black crape. But a wife could not be expected to prepare for a future she was forbidden to enter. So Cecilia asked for the key. No servant would cross the threshold after unlocking the door. Cecilia did the work herself. For 3 weeks she opened windows, wiped the cradle rail, folded linen, and sat alone in the pale room, until it felt less like a sealed command and more like a question. She found the ivory rattle in the bottom drawer of a chest and tied the blue ribbon again because it had come loose in her hand. It was such a small thing, that ribbon. Small things became dangerous when no one saw the woman doing them. Then Ignatius brought his friends to the east wing. After the nursery door closed behind him, Cecilia remained standing until the basin water went cold. When she finally left, she locked the door with steady hands. The next morning, Cecilia returned the nursery key to Mrs. Hughes. "Place it back on the board," she said. The housekeeper blinked. "Your Grace does not wish to continue?" "No." The word was plain. It cost her more than it should have. She did not ask for Ignatius. She did not send a note. She did not demand an apology in Camilla's dramatic manner. She simply stopped offering the house pieces of herself it did not want. The changes were small enough that a careless man might have missed them. The narcissus bowls disappeared once the blooms faded. She did not replace them. The west sitting room door stayed shut. The cambric and wool she had ordered for the nursery arrived from Chester. By evening, the wool had been measured for the Kettle family, and the cambric folded for the parish poor box. "Are you certain, Your Grace?" her maid asked, touching the soft cloth with reverence. "It is very fine." "It will be finer where it is needed," Cecilia said it without bitterness. That was the trouble. This was the careful closing of a door inside herself, Ignatius noticed on the 4th day. He had sent Edward and Desmond back to London 2 mornings early, citing estate accounts. He had not come to her. He had not mentioned the nursery. But Cecilia felt the house change around his attention. At breakfast, he looked at the empty place where early roses had stood. At dinner, he paused when no candles were lit in the west sitting room. On Thursday, Cecilia passed the study and heard Mrs. Hughes inside. The door was not fully closed. "Why was the east nursery opened?" Ignatius asked. "Her Grace asked for the key, Your Grace. I believed it proper." "Did she order maids to clean it?" "No, Your Grace. No maid would go in. Her Grace cleaned it herself. For near 3 weeks." Silence followed. Cecilia moved away before she could hear more. She would not stand in corridors collecting pieces of his regret like charity. That evening, Ignatius addressed her at dinner for the first time since the insult. "The weather has turned." Cecilia placed her spoon down. "Yes, Your Grace." The footman pretended not to hear the strangeness of it. Husband and wife discussing weather across 20 feet of polished table. "Are your apartments warm enough?" he asked. "They are adequate." His gaze dropped to her hand. Cecilia had folded her right thumb beneath her napkin, but not quickly enough. The skin was red and rubbed raw from the cradle rail. She saw him see it. A moment passed. "I will have more coal sent up," he said. "As Your Grace wishes." He looked as if he might say more. He did not. Later that night, a small pot of beeswax salve appeared outside her dressing room. No note, only the faint scent of honey and lavender. It was not an apology. But it was the first thing in Harrowgate Hall that had reached her without ceremony. Near midnight, unable to rest, she went to the library for a book. As she passed the east wing, she saw a man's shape in the darkness. Ignatius stood outside the nursery. His hand hovered near the door, as it had that morning, but this time he did not have friends behind him. This time no one laughed. The corridor was lit only by a dying lamp, and its light made hollows of his face. He did not open the door. He stood before it like a condemned man outside his own sentence. Cecilia stepped back before he saw her. She felt no triumph, only the heavy knowledge that his cruelty had a grave behind it, and that a grave could still be used to wound the living. The next afternoon, she went to his study. Ignatius was sitting behind his desk when Cecilia entered without being announced. He rose at once. The courtesy was automatic. The surprise was not. "Madam?" Cecilia crossed the carpet and placed the ivory rattle on the leather blotter between them. The faded blue ribbon lay against the dark surface like a bruise. "This was not mine to keep," she said. Ignatius did not touch it. For several seconds, he did not seem to breathe. "Where did you find it?" "In the bottom drawer of the nursery chest." His fingers closed slowly around the edge of the desk. "I did not know," Cecilia continued. "Mrs. Hughes said the room should be aired. I thought it was a duty. I thought I was expected to prepare it." He looked up then. The expression on his face was not the hard boredom she had come to expect. It was a man struck where armor did not cover him. "It was prepared once," he said. Cecilia waited. Ignatius lowered himself back into the chair. Her name was Helena. The room seemed to contract around the name. "She was 20, he said. She took a fever in her 7th month. The physician came from Chester, then another from London. It made no difference." His hand moved at last. He touched the ribbon with the back of one finger, barely enough to stir it. "The child never drew breath. Helena died before dawn. They had put that rattle in the cradle the evening before, because the nurse said a cheerful object might encourage hope." He gave a sound that was not a laugh. "I locked the nursery after the funeral. I told myself I was preserving the room. In truth, I was preserving the moment before loss, because everything after it was unendurable." Cecilia's throat tightened. She had imagined pride, disgust, regret at having married the wrong cousin. She had not imagined this. But pity could be another way of erasing herself if she let it do all the speaking. "I am sorry for what you lost," she said. "Truly." His eyes closed. "But I am not Helena." They opened again. "I never asked to take her place," Cecilia said. "I never asked you to forget her. I asked only to be permitted to exist in the house where you brought me as your wife." Ignatius flinched. "That morning," she continued, "you did not defend a memory. You used it as a wall and struck me with the stones." Cecilia. It was the first time he had used her name. The sound of it nearly broke her composure. She hated that. She hated that one word spoken too late could still find the softest place in her. She dipped her head once, not a curtsy, not surrender. "There is no room for the living here," she said. "Not yet." She turned to go. Behind her, the chair scraped. "Stay." It was a command by habit. He heard it too. The word seemed to shame him. "Please," he said lower, "if you can bear it." Cecilia stopped at the door. Ignatius came around the desk, but he did not touch her. Instead, he took the poker and stirred the low fire until it caught. Then he moved the armchair nearer the hearth and stepped back, leaving the choice to her. "Your hands are cold," he said. "You need not forgive me to warm them." That was better than an apology in one way. It asked for nothing. Cecilia sat. For a while there was only the sound of the fire. After a few minutes he set the pot of beeswax salve on the small table beside her, the same pot that had appeared outside her room. "I should have handed it to you myself," he said. "Yes," she answered. A faint, pained breath left him. "I shall learn." It was not a thaw. It was the first crack in the ice. Spring came to Harrowgate in careful pieces. The fields beyond the south lawn turned green. Tenants came with roof repairs and old grievances. Cecilia took the account books into the morning room and began learning the estate as if it were a language. Ignatius did not suddenly become warm. He was not a man made for easy tenderness, but he began to remain. He remained at breakfast long enough to notice she took weak tea in the morning and stronger tea after riding. He remained in the library when she entered. He began bringing tenant matters to her rather than speaking over her to the steward. The first time he asked her opinion, Mr. Pell nearly dropped his pencil. "The mill cottages should be repaired before the ornamental bridge," Cecilia said. "Guests can admire a cracked bridge. Families cannot sleep under cracked slate." Ignatius looked at her for a long moment. "Then the bridge waits." In Harrowgate, that small sentence moved furniture in the soul. One afternoon, Ignatius found her in the conservatory, cutting back an orange tree that had not borne fruit in years. "The gardeners can do that," he said from the doorway. "The gardeners have avoided it because it looks worse before it improves." He came closer. "Are you determined to mend everything I neglected?" Cecilia stepped down from the stool. "No, I am learning the difference between what is neglected and what refuses to live." The words landed quietly. His face tightened, not in anger, but because he understood she was not speaking only of trees. "And the East Nursery?" he asked. The question had come from him. That mattered. Cecilia rested the shears against her palm. "Do you intend to keep it locked forever?" "I thought that was mercy." "For whom?" "For her memory." Cecilia drew a slow breath. "Memory does not need a locked door," she said. "Fear does." He looked away. "You handed me a title and kept the house loyal to a sorrow I was never permitted to understand," she said. "Then you allowed men to laugh at me for trying to obey a custom you never explained. I was cruel. Yes. I was a coward. Yes. A strange expression crossed his face, almost relief. Cecilia picked up the shears again, but her fingers were not as steady as she wished. You are not betraying the dead by seeing the living, she said. But you are punishing the living for having survived. The shears slipped. Ignatius moved quickly and caught them before they struck the tiles. The blade nicked his finger. A bright bead of blood rose against the skin. He stared at it, as if surprised his body could still prove him human. Cecilia held out a clean cloth. He accepted it. I do not prefer ghosts, he said, pressing the cloth to his finger. I only forgot how to speak anywhere else. The door opened before Cecilia could answer. The butler stepped into the conservatory, silver salver in hand. A letter, Your Grace, for Her Grace. Cecilia recognized the red wax before she broke it. Camilla Prescott had always sealed her letters as if each were a royal proclamation. Cecilia read the first line and felt the damp heat of the conservatory turn cold. My cousin is coming to Cheshire, she said. She will attend the Midsummer Assembly. Ignatius's expression hardened. Camilla Prescott. Yes. She lowered the page. The elegant script seemed to smile up at her. She writes that she is eager to meet the duchess who took her place. The cut on Ignatius's finger bled through the cloth. This time Cecilia was the one who noticed. Camilla arrived 3 days before the assembly in a glossy green traveling carriage with far too many trunks. She descended in rose silk, kissed the air beside Cecilia's cheek, and glanced past her toward Ignatius, as if measuring the temperature of the marriage before removing her gloves. Cecilia, darling, she said. How well you look. Quiet suits you even better as a duchess. Cecilia smiled with the small courtesy required of a hostess. Welcome to Harrowgate. Camilla's gaze slid toward the closed eastern corridor. How grand it is, though one hears certain wings are more lively than others. Ignatius stood near the great hall fireplace. Miss Prescott, he said, bowing, you are our guest. I trust you will remember it. Camilla's lashes lowered. Your Grace, I remember everything. So did Cecilia. At tea the next afternoon, Camilla inspected the china, the sandwiches, the thin slices of seed cake, and finally, the cradle-shaped silver sugar basket that had belonged to some long-dead duchess. How charming, Camilla said, lifting the sugar tongs. A cradle on the tea table. Harrowgate does have a talent for reminding one of what is expected. Cecilia poured without spilling a drop. Sugar, Camilla? None. I find too much sweetness cloying. Then I shall not force it upon you. Edward Aldridge looked down into his cup. Ignatius, standing near the window, said nothing. But Cecilia felt him listen. This time his silence did not leave her alone. By the end of the second day, Camilla's little cuts had become as regular as the clock on the mantel. At breakfast, she wondered whether Cecilia had yet learned which fork did not shame a duchess. In front of Mrs. Hughes, she praised the nursery linen Cecilia had sent away as charity, as though kindness were proof of failure. Edward and Desmond arrived that afternoon, invited weeks earlier, and now impossible to refuse without feeding gossip. Ignatius received them with a civility so cold, Edward lost color. Desmond mistook silence for safety. On the evening before the assembly, rain beat against the drawing-room windows. Camilla sat with Edward and Desmond dealing cards as if she dealt reputations. Cecilia sat by the window with embroidery in her lap. Ignatius stood at the mantel listening. Desmond had taken too much port. You missed a rare entertainment, Miss Prescott, he said. Harrowgate found Her Grace in the nursery last month, polishing a cradle, as if she meant to summon an heir by rubbing the wood. Edward's face changed. Desmond. But Desmond pressed on. The Duke said he forgot he had a wife. Best line of the season. The room went still. Cecilia's needle stopped halfway through a stitch. Ignatius turned from the mantel. Redmond. The name cracked through the room. Desmond looked up. His smile died. You will not repeat that sentence, Ignatius said. Not in this house. Not in London. Not where any decent person might hear you. I only quoted your grace. You quoted my shame. Camilla's eyes glittered. Ignatius stepped away from the mantel, not bellowing, not making a spectacle. But every gentleman in the room understood that the line had been drawn. I failed the Duchess once by allowing my grief to dress itself as wit, he said. If you find amusement in that, you may leave before supper. It might have satisfied Cecilia in another life. Her husband had defended her. His friends had heard it. But the wound remained hers. She set the embroidery aside and stood. Mrs. Hughes, she called. The housekeeper appeared at once from the hall. Yes, Your Grace. The flowers for tomorrow's assembly, Cecilia said. The great hall will be too warm once the candles are lit. Have the footman open the east nursery in the morning, and place the rose urns there until evening. Ignatius looked at her. Mrs. Hughes gripped her keys. The nursery, Your Grace. Yes, Cecilia kept her voice clear. It is a large room, with good air. It ought to serve the living. Camilla's fan stilled. No one laughed. Cecilia turned back to Desmond. If the cradle is mentioned again as a jest, you will not need the Duke to send you away. I will have your room cleared myself. Edward bowed his head. Desmond stared at the carpet. Ignatius did not speak over Cecilia. He stood where he was and let her words hold the room. That restraint from him was new. Later that night, Cecilia wrote a note to Mr. Sebastian Everley, the family solicitor. The linen bought with her private money for the East Wing was to remain under her direction for parish or household use as she chose. She sealed the note. A woman did not always need to run to reclaim ground. Sometimes she needed to name what was hers and remain standing on it. The Harrowgate Midsummer Assembly filled the great hall with candlelight silk and the hush of people pretending not to listen for scandal. Every notable family in Cheshire came. The baronet's wife arrived early enough to see the rose urns carried from the East Wing. The old dowager from Ashcombe declared loudly that Harrowgate Hall had not looked so well since before the war. Cecilia accepted every compliment with composure. The gown was a quiet act of defiance. Not bridal white, not widow's gray. Sapphire, deep and steady. She would not dress herself as an apology. Ignatius offered his arm before the first carriage, and Cecilia took it. Not because all was healed, because she would not let the county see division it had come to enjoy. Your hand is cold, he murmured as they stood beneath the chandeliers. It often is. I know. She looked at him then. He knew because he had looked. I had extra braziers placed near the dais, he said, not meeting her eyes. Cecilia turned her face forward before warmth could show too plainly on it. At 11, the dancing paused for supper. That was when Camilla chose her moment. She stood near the rose urns with Edward and Desmond on one side and a half-circle of county ladies on the other. Her voice lifted just enough to travel. Tell me, Cecilia, she said, smiling, as if they shared some private affection. I saw the footman carrying roses from the East Wing. Is that Harrowgate's idea of a nursery now, filling it with flowers because his duchess cannot fill it with an heir? A silence spread outward. The last note of the violin faltered. By the fireplace, Ignatius turned. Cecilia felt the old blow return. The cradle, the laughter. the title that protected her, and the husband who had not. But she was not in the nursery now. She was in the great hall. She did not look at Ignatius. If he came, he came. Her dignity could not wait for his stride. Cecilia stepped into the circle around Camilla. "The nursery held flowers today," she said, "because I ordered it." Camilla's smile sharpened. "How industrious." "Yes," Cecilia said. "I have learned industry is useful in a house where silence has been mistaken for virtue." A few women exchanged glances. Camilla's fan opened with a snap. "My dear one must be careful. A wife's first duty is not to rearrange rooms." "No," Cecilia said. "A wife's first duty is not to vanish." The words crossed the hall cleanly. Camilla's face changed. Cecilia turned not to perform, but because the room had been made part of her humiliation, and therefore would hear her answer. "I did not empty that cradle," she said. "I did not lock that room. I did not run from this house when its grief frightened me. I came here as a wife, and I have been judged for a sorrow that began before I crossed the threshold." No one moved. She looked back at Camilla. "You may call me the bride who took your place. But I am not your shadow, Camilla. I am not her late Grace's shadow. I am the Duchess of Harrowgate, and I will not be measured by an empty cradle in my own home." The silence after that was not empty. It was full of people understanding too late that they had come to watch a woman break, and had instead seen her stand. Ignatius reached her side. He did not step in front of her. He came beside her shoulder, close enough that she felt the heat of him through silk and black wool. "My wife has spoken," he said. The words were low, but they carried to the back of the hall. "And she speaks the truth." He looked first at Cecilia, not at the guests, not at Camilla, at Cecilia. "Months ago, in the East Nursery, I said I had forgotten I had a wife. I was wrong." His voice roughened but did not falter. "I had not forgotten. I had hidden from what a wife meant, because I was afraid to lose again. That fear made me dishonorable." A murmur moved through the room. Ignatius turned to Edward and Desmond. "You heard me insult the Duchess, and did not correct me. Worse, you used my failure as amusement." Edward bowed at once, his face pale. "Your Grace, I beg your pardon." Desmond followed, stiff and sweating. "Your Grace, I spoke unforgivably." Cecilia looked at them both. "You did." Edward flinched, as if the quiet words had more force than shouting. "I accept the apology," she said. "I will remember whether your conduct improves." Ignatius's gaze moved to Camilla. "You fled an arrangement you did not want," he said. "That was your right. But you do not get to return and make cruelty out of another woman's courage." Camilla's fan trembled once. "I meant no harm." "Then you are careless with harm," Cecilia answered. This time, Ignatius did not need to speak. Camilla looked around the hall and saw perhaps for the first time that her audience had shifted. Pity was an easy entertainment. Respect was harder to move. Ignatius extended his hand toward Cecilia. Not to claim her, not to silence her. A public request made in the open where his first insult had been repeated. "May I have the next dance, Your Grace?" For a heartbeat, Cecilia could not answer. He had called her by the title before, but this time the words did not guard a title. They honored the woman wearing it. She placed her hand in his. "Yes, Your Grace." The musicians began again, The guests parted. Ignatius led Cecilia to the center of the hall. He danced as he did everything important, with discipline, restraint, and absolute attention. "I should have chosen you aloud from the first," he said quietly as they turned. Cecilia held the measure of the dance. "You did not know me from the first." "No," he said, "but I knew enough to honor you. I failed there before I failed anywhere else." The honesty of it steadied her more than praise would have. "And now?" she asked. "Now I am asking whether I may spend what remains of my life learning you properly." The steps carried them apart, then back together. Cecilia looked at the cold Duke, who had learned too late that silence could wound, and who had still come beside her, rather than in front of her. "I will not be a ghost in your house," she said. His answer came at once. "No. You will be its heart if you still choose to remain." Cecilia did not forgive everything in the space of a dance. That would have been too easy. But when the dance ended, she did not remove her hand at once. The room saw that too. By morning, all of Cheshire would know. Let them. The punishment of the empty nursery did not fall upon Ignatius in one dramatic blow. It worked slowly, as true punishments often do. It came when he passed the east corridor and no longer saw only a locked door, but Cecilia's raw thumb on polished wood. It came when parish mothers blessed the duchess for the fine cambric, and tenants began asking whether her grace would hear their petitions. Most of all, it came when he understood that the house had felt dead, not because Helena had died there, but because he had forbidden anyone else to live there after her. After the assembly, consequences settled into place. Desmond left Harrowgate before noon and was not invited again. Edward wrote a second apology in his own hand. Camilla departed for Bath with fewer admirers than she had brought. Cecilia did not gloat. There was work to do. The mill cottages were repaired before autumn rain. The west sitting room opened again. Tenant wives came on Thursdays. Mrs. Hughes no longer approached the east corridor as if carrying a coffin. Ignatius courted his own wife with the seriousness of a man who had never learned the lighter arts. He sent no extravagant jewels. He wrote no purple verses. Instead, he arrived at breakfast before her and rose only when she did. He learned which callers tired her. He asked before entering her sitting room. When she spoke in estate meetings, he listened. Once, during a storm, she found him in the gallery, moving the narcissus bowls back to the windows himself. "They were better here," he said. Cecilia looked at the bulbs, then at him. They were. It was enough for that day. Healing came in layers. One wet afternoon in the library, Ignatius spoke Helena's name while telling Cecilia about a foolish spaniel that had once stolen a glove during a hunt. He stopped halfway bracing, as if expecting the old darkness to drag him under. Cecilia did not rescue him from the memory. She asked, "What color was the spaniel?" He looked at her, startled. Then his mouth moved, almost a smile. "Brown and white. A dreadful animal." Helena adored him. The name remained in the room. Cecilia sat beside the fire and listened to the rain touch the glass. She did not feel pushed aside. For the first time, she felt the past take its proper seat, no longer standing between them. On a clear Tuesday in October, he asked her to come to his study. Cecilia found him standing by the desk, with the brass nursery key in his palm. Beside it lay the ivory rattle. But the faded blue ribbon was gone. In its place was a fresh cream silk ribbon, tied with careful, imperfect hands. Cecilia recognized it at once. It had come from her sewing basket. Ignatius looked almost nervous. The expression sat strangely on his severe face. "I asked Mrs. Hughes for the key this morning," he said. Cecilia's breath caught. I have no right to ask you to fill that room, he continued. Not with a child, not with hope you do not yet feel, not with forgiveness I have not earned. His fingers closed around the key. But I would like to open it, with you, if you wish. Cecilia looked down at the key. For a moment, she was back in the cold nursery, her hands red from gray water, the cradle shining beneath her touch, while laughter struck the doorway behind her. Hope had been a trap once. She could not pretend her heart did not remember the shape of it. Ignatius waited. He did not reach for her. He did not soften the question by taking it back. He let the choice remain where he had placed it in her hands. Cecilia looked at the rattle. The blue ribbon had belonged to a dead woman and a child who never came home. The cream ribbon belonged to no one's replacement. It was simply hers. She placed her hand over his. Yes, she said. They walked together down the east corridor. No servants followed. No guests whispered. No friends laughed. The house was quiet, but not empty. At the nursery door, Ignatius paused. Cecilia felt the old fear pass through him. He did not hide it quickly enough this time. He let her see. Then he turned the key. The lock clicked cleanly. Autumn light flooded the nursery when the door opened. The room smelled faintly of beeswax roses long gone, and cool air from the opened windows. The cradle stood where it always had, dark mahogany gleaming under the lace canopy. Cecilia entered first. Ignatius led her. She crossed to the cradle and placed the ivory rattle inside. The cream ribbon lay bright against the small mattress. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ignatius came to stand beside her. Not behind, not before, beside. I once thought this room was my punishment, he said. Cecilia touched the cradle rail. Her thumb no longer hurt. And now? He looked at the empty cradle, then at her. Now I think it was waiting for me to stop punishing everyone else. Cecilia leaned her shoulder lightly against his arm. The cradle was still empty. But the room was not.